Hey everybody, I'm Garin. I'm on a mission to talk to one person from every country in the world, and today I'm talking to Jake from Scotland. Jake is a traveler and adventurer, and he's full of all kinds of interesting stories from travels off the beaten path, like his recent trips to Iraq and to Iran. So a lot of fun talking to him. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. One quick heads up. Due to some technical difficulties, the video is going to kind of cut in mid-conversation as I ask Jake what would compel somebody to go to these dangerous places. So without further ado, here's Jake from Scotland, and I hope you enjoy. That's the same thing that I heard when I went to Iran. You know, everybody was telling me how if I was going to go over there, I would become a political prisoner, or worst case scenario, have my head cut off, and they're going to put it on YouTube. And obviously that wasn't the case, but what compels you to do these things, to go to Iraq or Iran or whatever, these other dangerous places in the world?
Yeah. Well, I guess the first time I went, I think the first dangerous country I went to was Iraqi Kurdistan. And once I'd been there, I realized that everyone was just as friendly as anybody is around the world. You know, they're the same as anybody else in any other country. It kind of took down the fear factor of going to countries like Iran. I mean, I knew that Iran was kind of safe because I had heard so many good things about how hospitable the people were. The only thing from my part is that I don't have a consulate there. The British government and the Iranian government fell out, so there's no technical protection if something went wrong. So if I was arrested, for instance, which is what they always warn you about before you go to Iran, you know, I'd be screwed because I'd have no consular assistance apart from the Swedish consulate, but then I don't think they would even bother doing that much.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think it's just the sort of friendliness of the people. So that's what compels me to go. It's to kind of like reaffirm my belief that everybody around the world is just the same, kind of naturally friendly, naturally sort of personable, hospitable. And until that changes, I'll just carry on going to these kind of danger areas to sort of prove my point as well as sort of reaffirming my own belief in that.
I tell people that because after my trip to Iran, I thought maybe I could do this as kind of a project where I'll go to every country on the U.S. State Department travel warning list. I don't know about in the U.K., but in America, our government gives us this list of places that you shouldn't go. And it's huge. It's like 20% of the world is on there or something crazy like that. There's like 30 countries on there. That's not quite 20%, but it's such a crazy mindset, you know, that the world's so dangerous, you shouldn't go see a big chunk of it. And just like you said, that's not the reality whatsoever. So I think, well, I'll just go to these places and I'll be the canary in the coal mine. If it really is that dangerous, then I'll find out. I'll be the one that gets locked up or whatever. But, you know, I'm willing to bet that every single time I come back and I'll tell you the same thing, that people are the same. And it's, an amazing experience.
Yeah, well, I think with countries like Iran especially, people there, because it's so isolated because of the way the governments work, and because of our government are so opposed, like me and you come from like the Western sort of system, whether we like it or not, or whether we believe in that or not, and they are in this area that's controlled by, well, the Iranian system, which is so different from its neighbors, and they're so isolated because of that they're kind of grateful, I think, when you arrive. I was speaking to a guy when I was there. And this guy, he was Iranian, but he was a yoga teacher, and he spent most of his time in India and then some of his time in Sweden. And we walked around this park. I can't remember where we were. We're in Rasht, in the north of Iran. And I was sort of saying, which I say to all the Iranian people that I met, because it's true, like, oh, the Iranians are just so friendly. I've never felt threatened ever. Every time I get off a night bus at 3 a.m, someone always helps me find my way to the hotel or whatever. And he was saying, yeah, but also, the way that they are so welcoming all the time nowadays, especially people your age, makes me feel sad, because one of the reasons why they're so welcoming and so eager to speak to you is because they're so cut off from the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. So they're like watching the world happen around them, and they really want to be part of this sort of progressive modernism, sort of with all the arts and the music that they want to be part of, but it's so difficult for them to be part of. Mm-hmm. And I sort of realized that is, there's like, I go sit in a tea room in Rasht, and I'm surrounded by maybe 8 or 9 people, all about my age, asking me questions, and it was great for me, and I really enjoyed it. But it also it kind of exposes an element of the system that they have to live in and day out, which I think is quite interesting.
That is interesting. That never That didn't occur to me. But
Mm.
I had the exact same experience, and for me, I felt, and that makes 100% sense. I'm sure you're true about that. You're right about that. But what I thought was probably happening a lot too was that, because same thing. I mean, people were so nice. As an American, I had to go as part of a tour. Like we had to have a guide with us at all times. We bumped into this German one day who was kind of like you. He just was able to get a visa and go there and do what he
Yeah,
wanted. And we were so jealous.
I bet. Yeah, it
We're like,
must have
"Where's
been.
your guide? You know, who's keeping an eye on you?" And he's like, "Nobody. I just get to go do whatever I want."
Yeah, I know.
But people would come up to us and like just like your experiences were just so eager to talk to
Mm.
us and just really went out of their way to be welcoming and friendly. And I felt like a big reason for that was that they understand that they're in the crosshairs, you know, and
Mm.
they understand that the, you know, especially America, they're just looking for a reason to start something with them. So
Yeah,
they're just, and they're not stupid. They understand what the situation is, and they're just so
yeah,
eager to try to counteract that.
yeah,
So
yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I thought that too. In fact, I thought it really overwhelmed me when I first arrived in Tehran because, even if I go to these places where like my government is recommending me not to go, and even though I sort of decide to ignore those kind of warnings, it still sort of can niggle in the back of my mind a little bit when I arrive in Tehran by myself. But I was really sort of overwhelmed by how different the whole sort of atmosphere of the sort of Iranian society felt. I mean, it felt like I could have been in sort of France or something like that.
mhm.
It felt like a really sort of secular, the religious sort of aspect of it was not in your face. And the only time you saw the government presence, I guess, was with the big sort of pictures of Imam Khomeini and the Imam Khamenei or whatever he's called, the other guy, sort of legitimizing their government around every corner. But aside from that, in the cafes and in the like people's houses and parties that I went to in Tehran, it felt like I could have been anywhere in the world, and that was
Yeah.
really overwhelmed me at first.
There's so much of what you just said, you know, just brought back different things. Like one day we were in one of the fake Kentucky Fried Chickens, you know, Kentucky
Yeah, I
House or
saw.
something. And
Yeah,
here we were like, we're looking at the board of all these, you know, chicken meals and chicken sandwiches, and then right next to it is like the obligatory picture of the
yeah,
imams. And we're like,
yeah.
this is so crazy. I mean, Colonel Sanders meets the imam, you know.
I know. Yeah, it's so contradictory, isn't it?
And then like you were saying about same thing when I went, I had no qualms about it whatsoever. Like I wasn't scared about it. I wasn't
Yeah,
nervous. And so I got there like 4 in the morning or something.
yeah. Same with me. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm in line to do the immigration stuff, and the line's taking forever. So I finally get up to the head of the line, and I hand the guy my passport, and he looks at it, and he goes, "America?" And I'm like, "Yeah, America." And he like closes the gate and stands up and goes, "Come with me." And at that moment, I'm like, "Oh shit, I was wrong. I was horribly mistaken.
I've made a
Everybody
terrible.
else was right. What was I thinking?" And they lead me over like to this little counter out of the way. And for like half an hour, they just start grilling me about where I'm gonna stay and who I'm gonna stay with, who's in charge of the tour I'm on. And I keep telling them like, this is the name of the company. This is the guy that I've been talking to, but I don't know who's picking me up at the airport. I don't know what his name is. But he works for this company, and I don't know what the hotel is that we're staying at. Like they've arranged all that. And for like half an hour, these guys of, you know, kind of increasing importance with fancier uniforms come out and ask me the exact same questions.
Oh God.
And finally, one guy tells me no address, because that was the sticking point. I didn't know what the address was of the hotel. He
Yeah.
says no address, no Iran, and like points back down the terminal. So like I'm sitting in like with this usual suspects group out of the way that also can't get into the country, and I ended up getting in, but for a while I was like, oh my gosh, they were right. I'm gonna become a political prisoner.
Oh God. Yeah, I didn't have any. I had like opposite experience. I thought the one time I thought I might be in some sort of trouble was I was taking a bus from Yazd to Shiraz. So this bus was like 6 hours long, and it wasn't in any dangerous areas, but it was skirting towards the sort of east of Iran where they have sort of checkpoints now and then, and they often sort of pick on the Baluchi people who are on the bus. And anyway, this policeman came down. He was in military sort of uniform, and asked to see my passport, which I was like, okay, that's fine. But like in the back of my head, because it was so, I can't remember what time of day it was, but I was so tired. I was like, this is it. This is where I'm arrested. So might as well just start packing my bag, put my books away, and get ready to go. And he was sort of like, oh man, is that the new Lonely Planet? Because I had the new Lonely Planet, and I was like, yeah. He was like, oh, can I see it? I was like, yeah. That was it. That was my only experience with
Oh wow.
police. He just wanted to see the new guidebook.
That's so cool.
Mm,
So you talked about how you got to go to people's homes and their parties and stuff, and that's something people invited us all the time. Hey, I'm going to a party. Hey, I'm going to a birthday party. You know, do you want to come?
yeah,
Do you want to come over? We'll cook you dinner. And we couldn't. Our guide wouldn't let us do that kind of stuff. And we were
yeah, not
so
surprised.
bummed out. So what was it like? What was it like getting to hang out in people's
Well, I
homes?
went to one proper party, and um, yeah, there was alcohol there, and there's alcohol is like quite easily available in Tehran, especially, which was another thing that surprised me. And the music wasn't even kept very low. I think there's just so many people who live like that in Tehran that the police can't keep a track on what's going on because there's so many people in Tehran for a start anyway. And it was just a really nice atmosphere. Like no one was wearing the hijab. Everyone was inside the flat, and we were just dancing. I got taught how to dance Persian style, which was embarrassing because I can't dance any style anyway. But the people were sort of very eager to sort of, I don't know, incorporate me into this party, even though it was someone's birthday party who I'd never met in my life before. But in general, I got invited to people's houses, particularly in the West. So I went. So my general route was from Tehran down through the central Iran to Esfahan, then to Yazd, Shiraz, and then I went to Kurdistan, and that's where I got like invited back to people's houses quite a lot. One guy in particular, I stayed with him the whole time I was in Kurdistan, and I just met him in the shop when I was trying to top up my mobile phone. And like 20 minutes after I arrived in Sanandaj in Kurdistan, and then half an hour later, I was sat with his family having dinner, and I went to watch him play football the next day, and then I went to his grandparents' house the day after in this village in Kurdistan where we had more dinner and tea and oranges, and that was just that was incredible. There's like
Wow.
yeah, I know it was like some sort of I don't know. It's like I didn't have to do anything. I just turned up in a place and someone took me under their wing and showed me this amazing side to their region that I would not have seen otherwise if I just sat in the hotel because there's nothing to do after 9 o'clock in Iran if you've not got any friends in that area because everything closes and there's no like bars or anything. But so that was great.
What a
But I
cool
think
experience.
I know it was amazing. I think it happened in the West because it wasn't touristy because it was January, so it was very snowy in the mountains, and so people were sort of even more surprised to see me, like, "What the hell are you doing here at this time of year?" kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
That's
Yeah, it
really
was really
neat.
good.
So a question I have for you is, um, last, I guess it was like last fall, I gave a talk at a Persian restaurant here in my city. I
Mm-hmm.
live in Portland, Oregon. And
Uh,
so I just hit him up and I said, hey, I went to Iran and I fell in love with it. Would you want to do like a talk where I share my experience, my pictures and stuff, and kind of
mm,
open your restaurant up as like an open house and just show people like kind of the truth about Iran?
yeah.
So it was really cool. We pulled it off, and it was just a really cool event. And I told them, my job is not to, tell you how you should think about Iran, and I don't know all the political stuff behind the scenes.
Mm,
And it would be a disservice to the people that I met there to say that everything's perfectly fine. Like like you said, I mean, there are issues there, um, with like the hijab and things like that,
yeah.
but at the end of the day, like there's just like us, there's so many good things about the country. It's not this nefarious regime that we have to take out right
Yeah.
away or whatever it is. So I just want to show you my perspective of things. I'm not saying it's
Mm,
the whole perspective, but it's something different that you don't see on TV. So I showed all my pictures and talked about my experience and stuff. And at the end, this guy comes up to me and he says, I'm Iranian. I've lived in America since the revolution. And he's like, I'm here in Portland on business. I'm attending some seminar, and I just decided to pop in and have dinner. And it just so happened to be this night that you're giving your talk. And he kind of pulls me aside and he goes, I want to let you know that nothing that you said was necessarily wrong, but it's such a small slice of reality. And he kind of goes on to say that the truth, like if you were there any longer than 2 weeks, which is how long I was there, you would have seen, and he kind of goes down the list of all these horrible civil rights abuses and how much people are suffering. And he kind of like really took me to task over saying nice things about Iran. And he was like, he kind of encouraged me not to say nice things anymore. And it was really weird to me because I was like, I didn't know how to balance that. You know, on the one hand, I'm sure he's right. I'm sure that they deserve more freedoms than there are, you know, people suffering in some ways. But I was like, you know, I can't deny the fact that I can't believe that everybody who was nice to me and everybody that smiled at me and everybody, not even people that interacted with me, but like same places you were at. I was hanging out in Isfahan in the square or by the river, and people are laughing and smiling and playing with their kids and having picnics. I can't imagine that was all just a big front, you know? And anywhere in the world, people find a way to get by. So I don't know. I don't know what the question is in there, but just kind of like in your opinion, you know, was there like a real deeper level that we didn't see, or I don't know.
Yeah, I think I started to get a sense for that sort of deeper level of rebelliousness. I did a blog post on this, which was sort of, to summarize, I was saying about the way in which people like rebel on an everyday sort of level in Iran. I mean, I studied anthropology at university, and a lot of that, you can easily get a very good mark in an essay if you say that some sort of community is rebelling against a larger community in a way that doesn't look like it's obviously rebelling, if you know what I mean. So obviously I think people would have to get on with day-to-day living. I mean, because it's important for them to have family, have friends, have fun and laugh. I remember speaking to one guy. In fact, I spoke to a few people about the Green movement that happened there, and the people who were involved in the Green movement. And I won't name any names or anything because they'd be in serious trouble if anybody saw this. But one of the guys really, really struck me was, well, I met up with some friends in Tabriz, and they were staying with a guy, and he came and picked us up, and we went for to a restaurant to have lunch, and it was kind of out of town. I think it's where young people went to sort of get away from the glare of the police or whatever, because there's lots of young couples sat around smoking shisha pipes and stuff. And this guy, I was saying, I've just come from Kurdistan and I had a really nice time. You know, I stayed with this guy. I had dinner with his friends and his family every day and stuff. And he was like, oh, yeah. And my friend kind of looked at him in a kind of way to suggest that they'd been talking about Kurdistan. And I was like, what, have you got a different experience of it? And he was like, yeah, sort of. And I was like, what is it? And he's like, I'll tell you later. So anyway, we started having lunch, and we were sat after lunch smoking a shisha. And he sort of said, yeah, during the Green movement, my girlfriend was shot on the street, and I was arrested during the Green movement, and he was forced into military service. So, you know, everyone in Iran has to do military service anyway. For 2 years, he had to do 2 years forced military service or face time in jail for indefinite amount of years, you know. So he did this, and he had to be trained up as a sniper, where he fought in Kurdistan, because there is an insurgency in Kurdistan in Iran. I mean, it's well publicized that there's an insurgency in Turkey and Iraq and Syria. Although in Iraq they don't fight as much. But in Iran as well, it's sort of kind of pasted over by the government. You don't hear much about it, especially in the international news. So he was like saying, yeah, there's a massive insurgency, and he had to fight for those guys, like for the Iranian army against the Kurdish insurgency. And he was sort of like kind of depressed. And I was sort of like, you know, how do you react to someone who tells you that their girlfriend got shot on the street in front of them? And I met other people as well who were in the Green movement, and I think the government just clamped down with such efficiency and brutality after the Green movement that kind of our generation of people there, you know, the liberal-minded people who want change, were completely shocked. And now they find other ways to rebel, whether that's just letting their hijab slip back on their head slightly, or having parties, or drinking alcohol. But I think a lot of them want to just leave. I think it's called the brain drain. It's where people get educated in Iran, who get educated in Tehran, do their military service, and then leave as soon as they can and go to Britain or the US. Because almost everybody I spoke to, even if it was for a long period of time, would eventually ask me the question like, how much do you earn? Because I work as a waiter here, and they're like, how much do you earn as a waiter for a week in UK? Because everybody just wanted out, and people would even take notes on how much they could earn in a week and how much rent was, and I was just like, man, that's actually really sad. But so I did see that side of it where people were laughing and happy, and they certainly were amongst friends and with me, and they had no care in the world, or so it seemed. But I think they did have cares about their situation, but they can't constantly let them be at the top of their mind.
Yeah.
In fact, one thing that summarizes it is my friend said if people in Iran, if no one, or what was it again? He said everyone in Iran has 2 or 3 lives, and if not, they're either lying or they're boring. Which I think perfectly summed it up because everybody lives underground.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's nuts.
It was pretty crazy to sort of find that out.
Yeah, and it's hard for me because I'm kind of like that green movement you're talking about, how I'm like the kind of the liberal mindset and like,
Yeah.
you know, everything, it's not that bad, you know, and I don't know, but there is you know, a certain reality you have to deal with, but it bums me out that like, you know, it's 2014 in that there's people that still don't have the power or the, you know, the authority to live their lives the way that they want to, you know. And the thing that I always tell people, I don't know if this is a justification for my own benefit, but I think that it's true. Everything that you said is obviously true about Iran and the way people live over there, but is it so bad that gives us the authority to go in there and, you know, use force to evict their government, you know? And it's like the same thing can be said of America. You know, we're sliding in the wrong direction. Our government spies on us all the time now, you know, and there's a lot of civil liberties issues in my own country, you know? So it's like, who are we to say that that's bad, but we can do the things we do to our own citizens?
Yeah. No, I completely agree with that. There's going to have to be something that the Iranian population do themselves. But the unfortunate thing is that the current system in Iran comes as a domino effect of like former foreign interventions. So after there's a democratically elected president or something in the 60s who decided to nationalize the oil in Iran. Yeah. Which you know the story. So they the British and the Americans sent the CIA and MI5 agents over to start a military coup, and then they placed their own Shah back in. So that's sort of like the current system now is an effect of, it's like a hangover of that kind of foreign intervention in Iran. So now you're sort of in a conundrum, like we can't really get involved anymore because we've already really sort of messed it up because now we're unhappy with the current situation. Well, I say the Western governments in general are unhappy with the current situation in Iran. But it's that exists as a direct result of their history with each other, which I find really interesting. But
in the history itself, like it would sound like it was like a bad movie script if it wasn't true. Because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding of it is that, like you said, he nationalized the oil. At that point, they had this agreement with England that was a bit exploitative. You know, the England helped get all the oil out of the ground, and then in exchange, they got, you know, a great deal. And the Iranians said, you know, you've more than made up for your investments. We want to start getting a profit off of this now. So that they nationalized. And the Brits freaked out because I think it was like 100% of their oil came from Iran. And they had the largest navy in the world. And they go, oh my, this is a national defense issue. So they go to the Americans and they say, we got to get this Mossadegh guy out of there. And we really weren't interested in doing anything about it. So we were kind of hard to convince. So I can't remember the guy's name, but whatever the top British guy was in this situation, he comes up with a bright idea to use the communist word. So he goes, "Oh, did we mention that Mossadegh's a communist?" Our ears perk up. We send in this guy named Kermit Roosevelt, who was President Roosevelt's nephew, And this is the part where the story gets crazy. He starts publishing in all the newspapers that Mossadegh is a communist and a homosexual. And everybody goes, oh my gosh, our president's gay. Oh, we can't have that. And he pays people to riot in the streets, and then they get him booted out.
It's awful, isn't it?
It's just like, like I said, it would be comical if it wasn't true.
I know, yeah. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah, I need to read that book, All the Shah's Men. That's that sort of history of that kind of thing in Iran, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What was your favorite, I don't know, favorite memory or favorite place in Iran?
Well, I think it has to, some part of it has to be Kurdistan, staying with that, well, being with that family for all that time. But also, I really enjoyed Tehran. It gets a bit of a bad write-up from tourists, because it's so big and smoggy and so clogged up with traffic and people everywhere. But I don't know, it had some sort of charm to it that I liked. Maybe that's because I stayed with a really nice guy when I was there. He took all of his time out just to show me around and took me to the party and stuff like that. And Tehran was really nice, and Sanandaj, which is in Kurdistan. I had a fantastic time there. Yeah, it was great. I don't think there was a single bad experience, apart from a guy in a hostel who offered me a massage after my shower and then stared at me for 2 minutes. But that's not that.
Too funny.
It's not like they don't warn about that on the FCO.
Yeah. How did so one thing, like you brought up religion a while ago, and I don't know about in the UK, but I felt like that was a really powerful correlation between America and Iran, even more so than a lot of other places in the world. So in the United States, we're like your Puritan offshoot, you know, all of the prudes got on boats and came to America, and that's we still have that lineage a little bit. So in America, everybody's a Christian, you know, everybody, like 90% of people say they're Christians or whatever, but and like, you know, there's crosses everywhere, and you know, we say things like God bless America and in God we trust, but like the way that manifests itself in people's daily life is kind of nil, you know, like most people don't live their life by Christian tenets necessarily. So it's kind of this weird, like nominally you kind of have to, all of our presidents have to say that they're Christians. They have to put their hand on the Bible. Anyways, I felt like Iran was that way too, where they all have to wear the veil for religious purposes. And there's like the alms boxes everywhere, and everybody kind of has to nominally be Muslim. But in their daily life, like they're just regular people like anybody else. They weren't, you know, not that religion's a bad thing. I'm not saying that's you know, that it would be bad if they were more religious, but it was just like, you know, they're not these extremists. They're not motivated by, you know, converting everybody to Islam or whatever. And for me, that was like a really powerful correlation.
Yeah, I can understand that actually too. I felt the same way. It was not intrusive at all, the sort of religious aspect, although not everyone, a lot of people I spoke to were religious. It just didn't sort of manifest itself in your face when you first met them, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's definitely a correlation. I did get asked quite a few times what religion I was, and I'd been told before, because I don't have a religion, but I've been told before that it was better to say, you know, you're off the book, so you're either Muslim or Christian. So I never tried out the atheist thing just to see what would happen, but I know that some of my friends who I made out there had no religion, but I think it's generally easier to get by in current Iranian society if you just go with being Shia Muslim. Okay. I think even people who aren't Shia Muslims, maybe they're Sunni, will sign the official forms by saying they're Shia, because they'll just come up against less sort of bureaucracy, just trying to get things done, which I find quite interesting. Yeah.
When you were in Isfahan, did you go to that Armenian church? Or
I did.
Yeah. For me, that was like, you know, we hear all of this religious propaganda, and I'm like, here I am in a Christian church in Iran in June, and they're playing Christmas music over the loudspeakers. It was like, there was no machine gun fire, and we weren't weren't barricaded in there. They knew that we were there. They could, you know.
Yeah, I found that amazing as well. I quite liked being in the church, actually. It was sort of quite familiar again, because I'd been on my own traveling all the way down Iran and seeing like mosque after mosque. So, not that the mosques weren't beautiful, but it's just sort of, it was quite strange but familiar at the same time to be stood in this church surrounded by sort of familiar European iconography, or I guess
Uh-huh.
Armenian iconography. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
good. It was nice.
How did how did Iran compare to Iraq?
Well, I only spent maybe 4 or 5 days, not even maybe 4 days in Iraqi Kurdistan. Um, I don't know. It definitely different. I mean, Iraq is obviously still a really dangerous country, and although the north part where I was is safe in general, there are still like military checkpoints like every hour's drive between all the cities, which makes you feel safer actually. But it reminds you of what's going on like further south in the country. And there was a suicide bomb the day after I left in Erbil, which was the first one in 6 years, which was horrible, horrible. But I mean, very rare still. I don't think it's happened quite to the same extent since. But there was a definite sort of, maybe it's just because I was the only um, like backpacker there that I saw. I didn't cross paths with anybody while I was there. And the first thing I saw when I got off the bus, well, I took the bus from southeast Turkey and I arrived at 5 in the morning with no hotel or a map or anything. And then first thing I saw was like a white UN Land Rover drive round the sort of citadel. And I was just like, oh, Jesus, what am I doing here? What have I done? But it turned out being fine. But there was definitely an atmosphere. I mean, I got a couple of funny looks that I wasn't too sort of comfortable with.
Mm.
Um, I think probably just suspicious. I think there's like it's quite a mixed culture. Even though it's predominantly Kurdish, there are sort of people that come up from Baghdad to escape the war and
Mm.
coming from Mosul and Kirkuk, and you don't know what all these people's politics are like. So you don't want to piss anybody off by being there, and especially if you're British, because they might have horribly like anti-British, horribly anti-American sentiment, probably quite rightly, but you don't know what could happen because of that. So there was a slight atmosphere, but I didn't feel threatened at all.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Interesting.
fantastic place, great
Yeah.
people as well, really friendly people, like Iran, very hospitable. I never paid for a cup of tea, which I felt terrible about until I'd like force them to accept a cup in return.
Wow.
Yeah, it was great.
Were people just blown away? You know, you go, they're like, "You're not from here," and you're like, "Yeah, I'm from the UK." Were they just like,
Yeah,
"Oh my gosh, why?"
yeah. You're like, why? Why are you here? But in Kurdistan, a lot of the Kurdish people really like the Brits and the Americans because yeah, our armies overthrew Saddam Hussein, who started like a small genocide with the Kurdish people over the
Mm.
20 years. So they're I mean, they're very happy for you to go to their country. I was very, very much welcomed when I said I'm from the UK by like the majority of people. They're like shaking my hand and stuff like that, which is quite surreal because I was sort of like, yeah, I don't know what I believe in, so but we'll go with it because it makes me feel good. um, no, it's a great country. I think it's only going to get more stable there, touch wood. So I think it will sort of start cropping up on this kind of tourism map because it's a beautiful place, loads of great mountains, and the cities are really developing fast, like quickly, and yeah, great people. It will be on the tourist map for sure, I think, in the next 4 or 5 years.
Cool. I've heard that about the Kurdish part, how that's the
Mm.
safest and it's really beautiful, and even people in Iraq, like when they go on vacation and stuff, that's kind of where people like to go.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I did. Met a lot of people from Baghdad in Kurdish areas. Um, yeah, they were either up on business or up looking for jobs. Yeah, it was great. It was well worth going to. Really was.
Neat.
Yeah.
I kind of like that idea of um, like traveling in vacations as like I don't know how to put it, but like for like an anthropological element to it, where it's
Mm.
like, okay, well, you could go to Disneyland, or I don't know where people in the UK go. You could go to the coast of Portugal or something, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
why not go to a place that's going to expand your own horizons? That's going to help you understand the world better, and then you're gonna, put your dollars or your pounds into a country that needs it more,
Yeah.
and I don't know. That's kind of the idea. Go going on vacation to Iraq.
Yeah, yeah, I know. It sounds really absurd, doesn't it? I really want to take my mum there because every time I go, like, oh, I'm gonna go to Iran, she's like, "What the bloody hell are you going there for?" I'm like, "You should come. It'll really change your opinion on what these kind of places are like."
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, there are some points though when you when you're in the middle of Iran and you're in some place like I was snowed in a place called Khorramabad where there's really nothing to do apart from I did get invited for dinner there, but it was like boring apart from that. And there was a time when I was sat there thinking I would love to be on the coast of Portugal right now, just in some all-inclusive hotel with like a bar and a pool and a beach. But yeah, but it is. I feel it's much more rewarding, sort of pushing the boundaries, and I think that's what backpackers in general and that kind of backpacking culture constantly do because you find people in the most like unusual places where you'd never expect them to be. So, for instance, I went to Armenia before I went to Iraqi Kurdistan, and I turned up in the capital, Yerevan, at maybe 10 o'clock at night. I was in the bus station outside of town, and I didn't know how to get in, so I was just sort of like looking at my map or whatever I had on my phone, and sort of just trying to really lazily figure out how to get to this hotel or hostel. And this person pulled up in a big black Land Rover and sort of got out the car, came walking over to me. And this guy was huge, and he said like, "Hey, buddy, are you lost?" And I was like, "What?" It turned out he was an American diplomat working in Yerevan, who just happened to see me waiting at the bus stop, and he told me of the time he went to Uzbekistan when he was like just after the breakup of the Soviet Union, and he said, "I reminded of him of a younger version of him." Because he was stood in the capital of Uzbekistan in like just after the breakup of the Soviet Union alone, and then some Irish guy came along and waved. He's like, "What are you doing here?" kind of thing. Like you just meet people in the most absurd places. Like people get everywhere. Backpackers just get everywhere, and they constantly pushing the boundaries, which I think why Iraqi Kurdistan's so alluring, and Iran's been alluring for a while for Europeans, but more so now for Brits. Now it's kind of easier to travel in. Yeah, it's really interesting, I think.
For sure. And I don't know, it's like I don't know what the answer is, but I want to somehow be able to translate those experiences and those lessons to people who like same thing, like our moms, their chances are they're not going to go over there. But I don't know, it's so important. For a long time, I just liked traveling and backpacking and stuff just because it was an adventure. And I was always reading Hemingway, and I just was like, when I'm an old man, I want to have this laundry list of cool things to brag about.
Mm-hmm.
But I got to a point where I was like, that in and of itself is not valuable, just having this stuff. And then I decided, well, maybe I can use that passion for traveling and for going to new places and having adventures and spread the message of we're all the same. And especially, I don't know, like in the UK or your political situation there, but for me, I feel like my government just wants to interfere in everybody else's business, and we're the most powerful country in the world, and we have the biggest military in human history, and we're not afraid to use it. And I just want to tell people, look, we don't live in this hostile, dangerous world where we have to fight for freedom. We don't have to constantly be on the offensive to assure our own security. If we just chilled out and treated people equitably, we'd find out that we're all basically the same,
Yeah.
So anyways, I don't know. I just don't know how to, and that's kind of what this project is, talking to people, online, is just a way of showing, these are what their faces look like and their voices.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't go there, at least you can see this conversation and kind of have this humanizing, experience to attach to that place. But
yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah.
Aside from that, we'll see where this project leads. But I just want to do more of that kind of stuff so that when people watch TV here in America and they're like, "Oh man, these Iranians, we might need to put them in their place," that people can kind of, think and go, "Wait a minute, they're just like us. They're not, these sinister people."
Yeah, yeah, that's a good compelling reason to travel as well, because it sort of kind of helps to break down the government sort of rhetoric that happens across the world. So it's like if a government goes to war with a country, it's not me who's going to war with this country. It's like, or if you know what I mean, if they meddle in foreign affairs where they shouldn't, I want to reinforce the idea that it's not me who's meddling in their affairs. It's I just want to meet the people. I just want
Yeah.
to. So yeah, I agree with you.
That's the next step, though, is to, figure out how we can, assert our voice. Because I 100% agree. Like, as an American, it makes me so mad that my tax dollars, at least in a foreign policy capacity, go to fund things that are just totally counter to my values.
Yeah,
And I feel like that's so undemocratic that I have to support things I don't believe in.
yeah, I
But
know. Yeah,
so, like you said, being able to raise my own voice and saying, "Hey, that's not me. That's important to me." But it would be more important to find a way that we don't do those in the first place. I don't know what the answer to
yeah,
that is.
yeah. That's difficult, isn't it? Because the way that our sort of styles of democracies in America and Britain is, you get your sort of voice to a certain point, but then the way the governments work is once they're in power, they get a certain amount of their own autonomy away
Hmm.
from the people's voice. So they get to sort of decide and choose,
Yeah.
which makes it difficult.
I
But
was reading
definitely,
about this just yesterday in relation to what's happening in Ukraine right now.
mm,
They were saying how most Americans don't realize that, like, our president gets on TV and he says things that make perfect sense. He's like, we don't want to get involved. It's not our place. We just hope that at the end of the day, the people in Ukraine get to steer the course of their own future. And
mm,
we say the same thing about Syria and
yeah,
um, I don't know, Venezuela. But behind the scenes, the fact of the matter is, our government is very involved in steering what happens in Ukraine right now.
absolutely, yeah,
And it's just this guy I was reading. He was talking about how in America, just like you said, the system that we're presented with is every 4 years you get to pick somebody who will lead your country and then determine foreign policy for 4 years. And if you don't
yeah,
like it, the best that you can do is wait until the next 4 years and then pick somebody new. Except
yeah,
the only issue is that both of the people that you're going to be given, you're only going to be given two choices, and they're both going to have the exact same foreign policy, and that foreign policy is the same one that's existed since 1950.
yeah.
So it's like, I don't know what if
That's
you
where it
don't
gets
like it, what can you
complicated.
do?
I know, yeah. But that's where it gets complicated with Ukraine because obviously with Ukraine, Yanukovych is now he's not stepped down. He's fled the country, and you get two sides to it. So you get the American and the European side, which is sort of like, yeah, well, that's what the people want. That's democracy in action kind of thing. And then you get the Russian side of it, which is well, he was a democratically elected president, so this is a military coup rather than sort of a democratic process. And it's kind of like I don't understand that point of view personally because are you meant to just sort of sit back for 4 years while this guy that you didn't elect runs your country how he wants to do it? So even if he's constantly going against what you believe in, surely that's just basic sort of power of the people. You'd think actually that the Russians would like what they did in Ukraine since it's like people power and they've got their old little socialist lilt. But it's funny because Putin constantly, Russia has been blocking all sort of intervention in Syria. And I don't know whether I want any foreign intervention in Syria or not really. I don't really, I'm undecided on that kind of thing. But it's funny that he will sort of say nobody should get involved in Syria, especially the West. And then as soon as something happens in Ukraine, he's sort of like, no, stand back, guys, I've got it. I'll go straight into Crimea and I'll cordon off the area and pull it into our own country.
Yeah.
I mean, you can kind of see why he did it in the ways that he's worried about Russian interests, but I mean, he's still not. It's not very cool.
I don't know enough about it to, give a
Mm.
opinion that I'm confident in standing behind. But some of the things I've read is that, first of all, Crimea is a predominantly Russian territory.
Mm.
Most people speak Russian as a first language, And I even read something about how recently there was a law that was passed in Ukraine to establish Ukrainian as the official language of the country, which alienated a lot of people in Crimea and in the
Mhm.
East who are linguistically Russian. So
Yeah,
that already kind of caused this big rift between East and West in Ukraine, and people in Crimea especially were like, we would rather be more allied
yeah,
with Russia, and people
yeah,
in the West, they, you know, their problem with Yanukovych, however you say his name, was this treaty that he reneged on and brought them closer
yeah,
under the wing of Russia, whereas Crimea was like, that's exactly where we want to be. We want to be under
yeah,
the wing of the
exactly.
Russians.
Yeah. Well,
And
Crimea used to belong to Russia until 1954, I think, and
mhm.
Khrushchev gave it to Ukraine. Um, but yeah, that's what makes it so complicated. The rest of the Ukraine is sort of split east to west, but I think I may be wrong. So maybe if you Skype someone from Ukraine, they can correct me. But I think that the majority of people in Ukraine, the mainland bit, not Crimea, are ethnically Ukrainian, but just some speak Russian.
Mm.
Whereas I think in Crimea, a lot of them are actually ethnically Russian, like
Okay.
historically ethnically Russian. But it's always been split down the middle. The East has always teetered towards Russian policies, and the West has always teetered towards the EU.
Hmm.
And now it's been like that for so long, and now this is just the moment where that's sort of spilling over, and they can't
Yeah.
contain it anymore.
And kind of like what you were saying too, what people don't realize here in the U.S., what what we do hear about Ukraine, which is not a ton, you know, is about, oh my gosh, the Russians are on the offensive and they've mobilized the army and they
Mm,
took over Crimea. But from the Russian perspective, just like you said, this is essentially a military coup. Some people don't like the way things were going, and they booted out a democratically elected leader. And
yeah.
I don't know if you saw this, but on YouTube there was a video that was leaked of, or it was just the audio, but it was a conversation between two high-ranking American ambassadors, and they're very much orchestrating what's happening. They're like, well, you know, Klitschko is gaining a lot of power. We don't like Klitschko, so we don't want him to be in this one position.
Mm,
But they're kind of like moving the pieces on the chessboard, you know. So the Russians see that and they go, "Oh my gosh, we've got a military coup, and the Americans are behind this, orchestrating what's going
mm.
to come next. Like, we don't want American puppet state right on our border." So
Yeah.
I don't
It's
know.
worked both ways as well. I think overall the Russians have got more of a control over Ukraine. I think the Americans definitely do want to make it pander towards their interests, which is making it pander towards the EU and their interests. But when they were about to sign a treaty, an EU treaty which would allow free trade between EU countries and Ukraine. And that's when Putin sort of moved in and he saw that he was losing his grasp on Ukraine.
Mm,
And he said to Yanukovych and the Ukrainians in general, if you sign this treaty, I'm going to, put up the price of your gas because all of the gas for Ukraine comes from Russia. He basically has like his hand on the tap. He can do whatever he likes with it. And he said, but if you join my alliance, which is like Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, like the Central Asian alliance, then I will cut the price of gas and I will pump like this so many billion euros into your or rubles into Ukraine. And that's when Yanukovych, on the day or the day before he was meant to sign the EU treaty, he was like, oh, maybe I should sign that one then because it's better. And that started the protests. But now the main thing that the protesters and the revolutionaries have in their favor is that he might have ordered the police to fire on the protesters, which means they would be able to criminally charge him for
mm.
crimes against civilians. But he'll carry on defending. I mean, he escaped to Russia where he's now safe. But he's just like, I don't know. He'll just take a back seat and let Putin control what's going on. I don't think there'll be a war there. But I think there may be a similar situation to what happened in Georgia after Russia invaded Georgia and they've got South Ossetia and Abkhazia in Georgia or whatever. They'll probably have Crimea, which will be a sort of autonomous Russian enclave. But fingers crossed there won't be a war because that would be dreadful.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think that there will be, but still, it's like I said before, it's just so odd to me. This is probably just a hippie libertarian thing to say, but it's just so odd that it's 2014 and this is like the statecraft that you read about in history books of, oh,
Mm, yeah.
well, this one deal was made and this is how. It's just kind of odd to me. Of course, it would be odder if it wasn't that way. You know, it's the same
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
always been, but it shouldn't be. It's just like if I was a
Mm,
person living in Ukraine or Crimea or whatever, I'm like, you know, me as an individual, my livelihood should not be influenced by these larger maneuverings.
yeah, I
It's
know.
just
Yeah,
so crazy to me.
I know. It's sort of it kind of it's annoying, isn't it? Because it makes you feel so powerless. So you can go from feeling quite powerful if everything's going along and you've got a nice job and you have a nice house and you're living comfortably, and then suddenly, because the government decides to change something, you're kind of out of pocket with no house or no, you're having a bit of an identity crisis, and there are foreign soldiers on your back garden, and yeah, it can make you feel probably quite helpless, which is where people become distraught and you know desperate.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I kind of like vacillate between. Um, I feel like I need to get involved and do something because I don't feel like this is how humans were intended to live. You know,
Mm.
me as an individual, I wasn't intended to, like I said, be at the whims of these larger machinations.
Yeah. Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's like maybe it's so much bigger than me that the response is like I listened to this podcast with a famous entrepreneur named Gary
Yeah.
Vaynerchuk, and
Uh-huh.
this guy asked him about kind of how he looks at political situations, and he goes, you know, I've built all of these businesses. I'm just very much a do-it-yourself independent person. I just kind of have the mindset that the government can't tell me what to do, so
Mm.
I'm just going to focus on my business, on making money, and you know, if it ever gets so bad, then I've got a skill set. I'll just go start a business in Brazil or something, you know.
Yeah.
But so it's like, is that maybe the better solution? Just kind of transcend it and just go, I can't change this.
Yeah.
I'm just going to try to just
That's
live
libertarianism,
well.
isn't it? Just do whatever you want, just ignore the government kind of thing. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
always wanted to do something like that.
So what are your plans now? You know, you gonna keep doing the cycle of serving and then
No, I don't
traveling,
know.
or what are your
I don't know
larger?
if I can keep that up. I think I need to sort of. I don't want to settle down, but if I can find a job where I can travel to, then that would be great. But I don't know. If I had the money right now, I'd probably go to Ukraine.
Mm,
But as I don't, then my plan probably is go to America in May. Well, definitely, because I've got more flights. So it's just about saving up some spending money for when I'm there. And then, I don't know, I think I'll try and maybe live in Britain for a year and save up enough money to do a bit more substantial travel rather than just a month here and a month there.
mm-hmm.
Which I'm fortunate to be able to do in the first place, but I'd quite like to sort of be away for 6 months or 7 months.
Yeah,
Do a photography project or something.
cool. Do you
Yeah,
know Vice.com?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, you should see if you could get a job with those guys.
Yeah, I probably should ask them because I'd be willing to go anywhere, really.
Yeah,
Yeah, they do some pretty crazy things.
I've been thinking. I don't. This is just like a very amorphous idea, but I love Vice so much. Um, and then so obviously you know TED Talks.
Hmm.
So I want to marry those two ideas somehow. So my thinking is that the TED conference is this decentralized global thing, but it
Yeah,
has its own very much a unifying brand or a spirit to it. You know,
yeah,
anybody in the world can start a TEDx conference, but anywhere that it does it, even though they're different people, you're still going to have that same spirit of
mhm,
innovation and excitement, and you know what I mean.
yeah,
So I wonder, and then Vice also has a very strong spirit and a brand of, you know, telling stories you won't hear anywhere else, of kind of
yeah.
this youthful counterculture movement, but they're very centralized. It's all, you know, they're all right there in Brooklyn, and they're, you
Uh-huh.
know, moving their teams around. I wonder if you could connect those two, where you go, we're going to do the same thing that Vice does. We're going to talk about, you know, news and kind of allowing a younger generation to speak their own voice, tell stories that nobody else is telling, but we're going to organize it in a way that's massively decentralized.
Hmm.
Where, I'm the America guy, you're the UK guy. I'm going to
Yeah.
go over to Venezuela. You're going to go to Ukraine or whatever. I don't know. I wonder if that would be possible to do something like that.
Yeah, I'm sure it would. I mean, I know that Vice have a UK office, or they at least have Vice UK. But yeah, I think you're right. I think it would work well on a very decentralized basis, since it's so. I mean, it's not like the BBC where everything comes in. Journalist reports come in with the same sort of standardized tone and yeah, with the same BBC standards. I mean, I think Vice, whenever I watch any of their features, like the different presenters and the different sort of journalists have such different takes on everything.
Mm-hmm.
Even though sometimes to me it can be slightly sensationalized. I think it's interesting. So you'd have such a really nice variation across the world if you had people reporting, especially people from their country reporting on events in their country, because they
Yeah,
would have the best perspective on anything.
for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, you
it
could
would
kind
be.
of just organize it where, we're not going to tell you what to say or how to present it or whatever, but here's
Yeah,
just kind of this ethos you have to coincide with somehow,
yeah,
and as long as you support the mission of what we're doing, yeah, you tell your story your
yeah,
way. And
yeah. That would be great, wouldn't it? I mean, we have the independence election coming up. I don't know if you knew that in September. So we have a referendum on whether Scotland should become independent from the UK.
oh, wow.
And if we vote yes, then we will be an independent country in 2 years, which would
Whoa.
be crazy. And now I think there's lots of different polls coming out, but some of the slightly more pro-independence polls are like, yeah, we've got like 50% of people want to say yes, and most of the polls are saying at the moment maybe 40% of people will say yes to independence. So
Wow.
that's a good news event for Scotland coming up.
How are you going to vote on that, you think?
I'm on the fence. I still can't decide. I think like my friends are kind of split 50-50 between people who would say yes and people who would say no. But they come from all different walks of life. There's no sort of majority of yes voters are this or majority of no voters are rich or whatever. It's not like
Hmm.
that. It's very, very mixed.
I'm sure there's a lot of considerations that go into it. Like, it's not just a pride issue, but it's like, well, there's a lot of economic things you got to think about and
Yeah,
a lot of logistical. I don't know.
yeah. The main problem for it is that it's such a grey area. So it's like because we've not been independent for over 300 years since we were invaded by the English. Like 300 years ago, we've been part of the UK.
Hmm.
So we kind of don't know what would be like independent. And obviously, the No campaign is using sort of anti-independence propaganda, which suggests that we would be poorer if we were independent, and the pro-Yes campaign are using a propaganda that suggests we would be richer, kind of thing. So it's kind of like, it's a leap of faith, and some people aren't very comfortable with, placing your faith in, well, like politics of faith or politics of the unknown, I guess, as well, because nobody knows. So
Hmm.
it's all based on emotion. But yeah, it'll be interesting in September. I'm quite looking forward to it.
The pro side should just play Braveheart in the streets.
Yeah.
Just every day,
Yeah.
just
Well,
paint
they've
their
coincided
faces.
they've coincided the election with like some famous battle, which was something to do with, I don't know if it was, I don't know actually. I don't want to comment on it because I such a thin knowledge of Scottish history that I'd just embarrass myself with all the wrong answers.
Uh,
Yeah.
Last night, my little brother was watching Rob Roy for the first time, so
There's a
so I'm
start.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, become independent.
Yeah.
Screw those guys.
Yeah.
For me, and this kind of goes back to what you were talking about the protesters in Ukraine. I think it's just so exciting seeing people have the opportunity to raise their own voices, and
Mm.
especially in terms of like creating a new country. Like,
Yeah.
just the fact that people have the opportunity to say, this is how we want to live. That's such a exciting idea
Yeah.
to me. That's, I don't know, that's how it's supposed to be. People should
Yeah.
have the right to make that decision.
Yeah. No, it's great, isn't it?
Hmm.
That sort of makes me grateful when I sort of come back to a country like Scotland, like when I was in Iran, to imagine this being a possibility for some region of Iran. I mean, even Catalonia, like the Catalans want independence and I think almost a majority of them are polled to they would vote yes if there was an election tomorrow.
Hmm.
But because it's against their constitution, the Spanish constitution, they're not allowed. So we have that sort of it's not against the law here. We are allowed the referendum and an election of independence. So that is quite exciting to see that happen.
Yeah.
We should be grateful that our politics are open enough for that kind of thing.
My family's Basque, so that's a
Oh, you're Basque.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
an issue that hits close to home for our family.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
cool.
We're all from the French side though. So and obviously I was born and raised in America, so it's not quite
Yeah,
my place, but our family, they're all on the French side, so they tend to kind of, it's smaller and it's more rural. They're all farmers there, so they're like,
yeah,
we don't care about, as long as we just get to herd our cattle and
yeah,
stuff.
yeah. Yeah, I think it's more active in the Spanish side.
Hmm.
Sure.
Yeah, it's crazy when you go over there and just, all the graffiti and, you see marches all the time and
Yeah,
political prisoners.
yeah, I know. Yeah, well, they've had an official ceasefire now. ETA handing in all their weapons and stuff.
Hmm.
Mm,
I know
yeah,
that's the one thing, most people, I talk about being Basque, and most people don't know what that means. But if you do, they're like, oh, they're the terrorists, right?
yeah, yeah. No,
Yeah.
ETA. No, we don't have an insurgency or a militia here in Scotland. I don't think we'd be very organised. We'd probably be drunk all the time.
Scotland is a pretty small place, right? How many people live in Scotland?
5 million
Uh-huh.
or thereabouts, 5 or 6. Yeah, so less than London.
Wow. It's crazy to me just uh like the how small of a population the Scots are, yet what an enormous impact, and especially as an American, like the cultural significance. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like most people in America, if you were to ask them about Iran, like they don't know anything about Iran. You probably couldn't point it out on a map. But if you say Scotland, all the stuff floods into your imagination
yeah,
about Scots. And the fact of the matter is there's like, 15 times more Iranians than there are Scots or something like that,
yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah. So I live in Oregon, and Oregon's on the West Coast, and Oregon is bigger than the UK
Hmm.
in terms of area, and 4 million people live here.
Wow, really, that's a very small population
Yeah,
density,
and
isn't
there's
it?
like what 80 million over there or something like that.
Yeah, 75 million or something. So I know Oregon's in Portland. What other major cities are there? Oh, hang on, I used to know your state capital. Um,
You want me to tell you or give you a hint?
yeah, give me a hint. What's the hint?
It starts with an S.
Is it Salem?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, there's not really any other major cities. So Portland is the biggest city. There's like not quite 2 million people in the whole surrounding
Yeah.
area. And then Salem is only 45 minutes away, and there's maybe 100,000 people there, and there's Eugene and Corvallis,
Right. Yeah.
but yeah, not really any other major cities really.
No, is it just is it the Cascade Mountains you have there?
Yeah. So
Hmm.
there's the coastal mountains right on the coast, and there's the Cascades that run north to south. So that there's that big strip, and pretty much everybody lives in that strip, and within that they mostly live in the north, which is the Willamette Valley, and that's where when we had the Oregon Trail back in the
Yeah.
yeah, everybody came out to the Willamette Valley, and everything on the other side of the Cascades is kind of just empty for the most part. Anybody who watches this from Pendleton will get pissed off at me, but other than there's not much out there.
Where do you border on the other side? Is it Idaho?
Hmm.
You touch Idaho there. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got my geography there.
Yeah, you're good in your geography. That's cool.
Yeah, I'd like to go to Oregon. I'd like to go to Portland.
Yeah,
I'd like to travel everywhere, but
yeah. I mean, that would be if you were to come out to the States, which you will. That would be a nice little itinerary. You could start up in Vancouver, BC, which is a fantastic place. Vancouver, Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, LA, San Diego. That'd be a pretty good trip.
yeah, that'd be great. Yeah. If I get more
Obviously-
time and money, I'd definitely be back in America. This was
Yeah.
a complete like this was just an invite to my friend's wedding, and also they were like, "Will you be the official photographer?" Which I can't exactly turn down.
Yeah.
So I'm really looking forward to it. But Texas is like for a Brit, Texas is quite a strange first state to visit in America. Usually, it's like New York or California or
Hmm.
more often Florida. So yeah, I'm quite excited.
Where in Texas will you be?
First Dallas, then Austin.
Okay.
Yeah.
I haven't spent much time there, but I've traveled across it 3 times. In
Uh-huh.
Austin is such a cool place. I love that city.
I've heard that it's cool. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
going to see a gig there, which I'm pretty excited about. And
Who?
then Bombay Bicycle Club.
Okay.
They're
Not
from London.
okay.
Yeah, which is just I listen to them all the time here, so it's just a complete coincidence they're in Austin when I'm in Austin.
You'll have to try to get backstage and hang out with them.
Oh, hell yeah, I'm gonna wear my kilt. That'll get them to notice me.
For sure. Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's this one street in Austin. I think it's called Fifth Street. It's a numbered street, Fifth, 12th, something. And the whole street is just all like music venues and bars. And when one of my friends and I, we went through there on a road trip. We were going coast to coast, and we coincided our trip to see Pennywise there.
Hmm.
I don't know if you know that it's a punk band we used to listen to all the time. So uh, all the opening bands were horrible. So we just walked down the street, and there was just like countless other bands, and people you hadn't ever even heard of either. Just some guy playing a guitar in a bar, but just so
Oh,
much great music. And then went back and saw the headlining band
yeah, I love that kind of culture.
for sure.
That sort of art is everything kind of thing, where everything's surrounded by music and you can just stroll around and experience so much different stuff.
Yeah. There's got to be a lot of that in Scotland too. You have such a rich cultural history.
Yeah, our big sort of artistic city is Glasgow. So Edinburgh's got all the history and the castle, and um, but Glasgow's got its own art school there, and it's got a great music scene as well. And it's still got a bit of an edge to it, which is nice. There's a good mix of student population, and it's got the original sort of working class population who go back to the time when it was a big industrial port, and so it makes for a really nice sort of setting and lots of creativity there, which is
Hmm.
good. A lot of my friends there have been through art school or play music, play in bands there.
Cool.
That's a nice city to hang out with. But Scotland's so small that it's like you can go from Glasgow to Edinburgh in like less than an hour on the train,
Wow.
be in the historic sort of capital for the day and walk around Edinburgh and go and have a nice coffee in a nice historic little brick cafe, and then go down to Glasgow for the evening and go on a night out.
Cool.
It's unbeatable. Yeah.
Do you have a lot of like national pride being Scottish?
Well, when I was traveling, I told people that I tell people that I'm Scottish over British, and I was actually born in England, so I could say English. But I say Scottish, which I guess maybe speaks for itself in a way. But I'm not nationalistic or patriotic at all.
Hmm.
But I don't know. But I do identify as being from Scotland.
Hmm.
So I don't really know why. I've just always done that. Really, I don't think it would have any effect if I said I was from England. It wouldn't be any difference. But yeah, means there certainly are a lot of people who are very nationalistic, but I wouldn't say any more so than England. A lot of people in England are very sort of proud to be English or
Hmm.
British. So they'll get like tattoos of the English flag and whatever,
Uh-huh.
however which way they want to represent their nationality. But yeah,
I think that's a really interesting subject because some people who do a lot of traveling, they have this epiphany where, you know, they've transcended nationalism and I'm a citizen of the world. And why would I be proud of where I just happened to be born when I had no stake in that? But and I guess I can kind of see that. But like I'm very proud to be an American. Like I love my country, and I don't know. I'm happy to be from here. I'm always happy to come back to here.
yeah,
I don't think that we're better than anywhere else. If I could be anywhere else in the world right now, I would be, but then I'd be happy to come right back. So it's
yeah.
kind of interesting how different people feel about pride or nationalism.
Yeah, no, I can see that. I think I'm the same with Scotland as well. It's like I didn't really want to come back after Iran just because I'd only been away for a month. I knew that what was waiting for me was like a sort of a waiting job for another 2 months, which I just wanted to be traveling,
Hmm.
even though I could not afford it in any way at all. But yeah, it was sort of. I didn't mind being back in Edinburgh, walking around and sort of kind of feeling Scottish again. Yeah, and I definitely felt quite. I liked being Scottish, like the Scottish person in the group when I was traveling. So if I just bumped into some Germans and like couple of French people, I quite liked saying I was from Scotland because I don't know why, but maybe there is some sort of slight pride there at the back of my
Hmm.
brain, my nationality.
It's
Hard enough to.
interesting that like, so you're from this very small a small culture within a culture, uh,
Mhm.
and at least like geographically, and there's not a lot of baggage attached to that. You say that you're Scottish, and people go, "Oh, cool, bagpipes and kilts," and that's
Yeah.
really cool. And then like for me, when I travel, everybody always goes, "Just tell everybody that you're Canadian." Don't don't admit that you're American. Just say you're Canadian.
Yeah, yeah. But people sometimes say that about English travelers in Europe because English travelers are famed. They've taken the brunt of the people who go to Ibiza or Greece or whatever and just get absolutely like smashed for a week. I mean, even though there's plenty of Scottish people in those groups as well. But yeah, I've heard that whole thing as well about just say you're Canadian rather than American. But people genuinely don't really care, do they? I've never had any problems about where I'm from. I
Uh,
wouldn't imagine you would from America. I mean, maybe if you traveled to some rural area of Afghanistan at the moment, I wouldn't say you were from America, but
mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's interesting.
yeah,
So we've already been talking for a long time, so I won't keep you too much longer. But there's a few questions that I always ask everybody on my
yeah.
interviews. So, what's something that brings joy and happiness to your life?
Photography.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, photography.
what's it
I'm
about?
happy when I'm on the other side of a camera. But I think it also helps me to interact with strangers because I do a lot of street portraiture, I guess you would call it. And so like my camera acts as a sort of icebreaker. If I'm
Hmm.
traveling alone, it acts as a nice icebreaker, so it'll lead on to other experiences that are sort of very fulfilling.
Cool. I'm a horrible photographer, but that's a tip I always tell people that I've learned. If you're by yourself in a place and you see somebody taking a picture of somebody else, I always go up and say, "Hey, do you want me to get one of both of you?"
Yeah, yeah,
And that's instant icebreaker.
it is. Yeah,
Do you know about that? The Humans of New York or the Humans of Tehran?
I have seen it on Facebook. Yeah, yeah, it's great. I really like that kind of photography, but I like because they have their little story or their sort of background information underneath,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is a great thing to do.
Yeah,
Nice, just because it sort of satiates your natural curiosity about other people. I think you can kind of just scroll through these images of strangers and find out about them, and sort of I don't know. It's just interesting for some reason.
for sure. Yeah, I love that. Um, what's kind of a big goal or a dream that you have for your life?
It's another thing to do with photography actually as well. I'd like to take an image that ends up being iconic.
Mm,
So maybe something like a news event that maybe circulates around in the newspapers for a long time, or maybe something that people will look at in 20, 30 years and sort of it'll be recognizable. That's sort of my main life goal, which I'll aim for.
yeah,
Yeah.
neat. That's a tough one though, because I don't know. I'm
That is,
how do you okay, this is the formula, do XYZ, and then you're gonna get there.
yeah. I don't really know. Right place, right time, I guess.
Yeah.
Keep an eye on the news. Go somewhere significant.
Have
Yeah.
you yeah, that's probably a good point too. Like, you I always think that in our lifetimes, I think that the defining theme of our generation is going to have to be freedom. You look at
Hmm.
these countries where people are protesting to change their governments, or you look in America and all of our, like with the Snowden stuff, the privacy.
Yeah.
I think that that's going to be the kind of the theme is freedom. So, if you put yourself in situations around that, that's kind of something that's going to resonate with people.
Yeah.
Have you read that book, Slightly Out of Focus, by Robert Capa?
No, I haven't. I know Robert Capa, but I've never read the book.
So it's just his autobiography about his experiences, and it's such a good book. He's not a writer, he's a photographer, but the
Mm.
book is so stinking good. And you'll like this because I'm in the same boat. I'm always broke, and I just scratch together enough money for plane tickets. But the book starts off with he's in his apartment in New York, and the only thing in the apartment is a bed and a telephone, and that might have been it. Just this empty apartment.
Mm.
So he wakes up and he says he has a nickel. That's his life savings is a nickel. And he goes, "Well, I can't leave the apartment because, I can't afford to do anything." So he's just kind of just laying in bed, feeling sorry for himself. And the phone's cut off because he hasn't paid the bill. So he looks over to the door, and there's 3 letters underneath the door. And he said that every day for the past couple weeks, he's gotten collection notices for the electricity and for the phone. So
Yeah.
he goes, "Well, I know that's what 2 of the letters are, but I don't know what the 3rd letter is." So that was compelling enough that he gets up out of bed. So he opens the first 2, and sure enough, they're collection notices. And the last one is a letter from some newspaper that they wanted to hire him and send him over to Europe to cover the war, World War II. And they gave him an advance of like $2,000 or something. So
Nice.
he takes the money and he goes downstairs. Oh, and I got mixed up. There was another letter that was a notice saying that he was an enemy alien because he was Hungarian, and
Uh-huh.
his visa expired, and he had to report to some agency in New York, and they were going to ship him out of America.
Yeah, yeah.
So he takes his advance, goes downstairs, eats this lavish breakfast, and then he sits down to write a letter to the newspaper. And he said, what I should have told them was that legally I can't be in America, so I can't work for you because I can't get my proper exit paperwork to leave. But he was like, I had already spent some of the advance, so I couldn't send him back, $1,998. So, anyways, he's like this super charismatic guy. So he goes down to the embassy and he just takes everybody out for drinks and gets everybody liquored up that has any authority to give him the passes, and they all become his best friends, and they stamp all the paperwork. And anyways, it's just such a cool book. But as a photographer, I bet you'd love it.
Yeah, yeah. I'd love to read that. That sounds great. It's like opportunistic.
Yeah,
That's pragmatism at its like best, isn't it? Really.
for sure. I read that first chapter every few months. It's a quick read, but it's just so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
slightly out of
I'll
focus, I suggest
out.
that.
Slightly out of focus. Yeah, I'll definitely read that. Sounds great.
The last question I always ask everybody is, if you could share one message with the whole world, if everybody in the world looked at you for 30 seconds, what message would you want to give to everybody?
Think for yourselves. Probably. Like, don't be too. Well, this is my prelude, like my preamble. Is think for yourselves. Now, I'd sort of say, yeah, be cautious of the amount of propaganda that's around you. So I think that's relevant for everybody in the world, no matter where they live, what country they live in, what sort of society or political system. So yeah, think for yourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
That's a good one.
yeah, that's what I'd say.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for talking to me. That was a lot of fun.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Yeah.
I've got one thing to show you actually, just before I go,
For sure.
which is a bit of a sort of controversial memento I picked up in Iran, which is after the celebration of the 35th anniversary of the revolution. I found this on the floor.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty sweet.
That goes back to like the propaganda, you always see pictures of the murals, of like the American flag made out of bombs and the skull, Statue of Liberty. And
Yeah.
it's so funny. Like those are probably 2 of the only anti-American experiences you could have in that whole country. Every other thing is just fantastic, but
Yeah. And I think even the people who were in that big protest, they were only there because they were public sector workers and they had to be there, or else they'd be in trouble by their boss. But yeah.
yeah, I've heard a lot of that, that
Yeah.
Even in Ukraine, I read about that. Or no, it wasn't in Ukraine. It was in Moscow. They had a big rally in support of the invasion of Crimea, and there was like 10,000 people there. But most of them, just these buses were showing up, dropping people off from
Yeah.
work.
It's absurd, isn't it?
Yeah,
The
for
way
sure.
the way governments legitimize themselves. Yeah.
Crazy. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
it was cool meeting you, and it was a lot of fun talking. We stay in touch, huh?
Yep. Yep. Yeah, it'd be great. Yeah. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, and if you ever end up out here in Portland, let me know.
Absolutely would. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll show
Cool.
you around.
Good luck with your project, by the way.
Cool, I appreciate
Right,
it.
great fun doing it.
Yeah, that was fun. All right, cool. I'll talk to you later.
Yep. Speak soon.
All right, see you, Jake.
Take care.
You too. So thanks for watching my interview with Jake from Scotland. It's not every day that I meet like-minded people, especially with all of my particular opinions about things. So for me, it was a lot of fun to have a cool conversation like this and to meet somebody who's kind of on the same wavelength. So I hope that you enjoyed this conversation, and I hope that you will tune back in shortly for more interviews with interesting people from around the world. Thanks.